not available. Oh yeah, hi.
What's up?
Hey,
Hello.
How you doing?
Good.
Very
How are
good.
you?
Nice, perfect. So yeah, let me pull out the questions. We have quite a few of them. I'm not sure when you wanna. Where you wanna start exactly, but yeah, let's just do it one by one without any specific order. One that I agree a lot with is the thing that web development is getting more complicated overall. Yeah, that's an
That's a
easy
good
one.
question.
Yes.
Amy, you want to start? We'll work our way
Oh
around.
man, yeah. There's several things that come to mind. The first thing that comes to mind is build tools can sometimes be more complicated, but it's one of those things that it also like alleviates things. So it's like it's maybe solving some problems that are making those less complicated, but making other things more complicated because it is another tool you have to learn, but it'll also abstract away a lot of the other pieces so you don't have to worry about it. So it's kind of like a both and. The other thing that I think is really interesting right now in the JavaScript ecosystem is when you start talking about full stack, like that's getting more complicated. Like people no longer have to know just HTML and CSS and maybe a little bit of JavaScript, but now you also have to know like how to manage a server or running a database and a whole bunch of other things.
Yeah.
I'm totally going to interject there and actually say that the full stack situation is actually probably making things a little bit less complicated because now we're kind of
hot take.
we're providing a way
That's
to
cool.
use the same language truly as a first-class
Good.
citizen on the front end and the back end, which might enable a single developer to do more with the same technology.
That's a good point.
Yeah, the full stack frameworks, I feel like, have ushered in this new realm of it's really hard to be just a front end developer or just a back end developer. And I've always said it makes you a better front end developer to understand the back end. It makes you a better back end developer to understand the front end, even if you're not doing that part, just having the understanding. I think the overwhelming amount of JavaScript frameworks, that's a lot. I think we also have seen a lot of transitions in what we consider best practices over the last couple of years. Well, I'd say couple, like 5 to 10 years. I think we went through this whole revolution with moving away from SPA frameworks, moving into statically generated content, then looking at that and saying like, okay, that's great, but it doesn't work for all scenarios. So now we need some server capability. So we got into frameworks like Next.js that kind of integrate building API endpoints into the framework and make it really easy to deploy. And then you look at, we've kind of gone back to doing as much on the server as we can. And then we get into React server components, which I think we've already seen like some frameworks that are not React start to look at or adapt that idea. And I have been working on a Next.js project recently where I'm doing server components and doing some things on the client when necessary. And it actually is pretty tricky to know when and where exactly your code is running and what you're able to pass between client and server components and where you're able to make certain calls to functions with actions and all these things. So in some ways, I think it is drastically getting more complicated. But the thing we have to remember, and I think you both kind of touched on this, the things we used to have to care about, we no longer have to care about at the depth that we used to. So if you think about hosting, if you think about databases, almost all hosting platforms now have an automatic GitHub deploy where you push to a certain branch and it automatically deploys it. That was something you had to do manually 10 years ago, right? Like that didn't exist. Now that is as easy as it could ever be. Deploying a backend now is easier than it's ever been if you're doing serverless functions in a framework like Next.js or Astro or Nux. Like they take care of handling the translation of actually being able to deploy that. So there's lots of things that we don't have to care about that we used to. So in that sense, it's gotten easier, but that then enables us or forces us to care about a lot more that's changing in web development.
And you just name dropped like a million frameworks there. And I think one thing that's interesting is I feel like the React world is kind of having like a coming together on how we're going to approach these problems, mostly because React gave us some solution ideas that were kind of explored by some of the frameworks, as they were working on it. But there's still a ton of choice in front end because React isn't the end all be all. You still have tons of other choices: Vue, Svelte, Solid, Quick, just to name a few. And so I think front end development in the React space is getting more simpler and more streamlined. but still the breadth of choice kind of makes it tough to get into once you break past that HTML, CSS, and JavaScript barrier and you're looking for more rich interactivity in your applications.
The contrarian thing, though, is that we are all speaking from a place of experience. And so it's like easy now that we have that foundation of knowledge. But for somebody getting into the industry, in some ways, we're like requiring them to know more. And so in that regard, it is more complicated.
Yeah,
wanna
let me
add-
tell you that like if you're trying to host an isomorphic app on like GitHub pages, you need to wake up early. So not all of them are equal in my opinion. And I have like people on Stack Overflow daily saying, hey, I don't know how it works. I'm like, yo, just drop it and maybe you don't even need to use Next or Next. Just use like React or Vue and that should be fine.
You can do that. Can I throw in one additional thing?
Let's go.
Front-end development now I think is really interesting because we're seeing this debate pop up more and more almost every single day. There's some comment about it. We're approaching front-end development from a JavaScript perspective. And front-end development like can specifically mean JavaScript where you're adding functionality specifically on the client side, but this revolution that we're seeing even in the JavaScript ecosystem is doing more on the server, which then leads to this conversation about, well, PHP does these things amazingly, and you don't need all these innovations that we're coming out with in the JavaScript ecosystem because they've been there for a long time. And Brad, I think you mentioned, or maybe Amy, I can't remember, like the benefit is we can use JavaScript front end and back end. But if you kind of branch out, and I haven't done that, but I know of it from other people talking about it, there's really good options to do a lot of what we consider front-end development and not even need front end, depending on how you look at it, because you can take care of a lot of the features on the back end with something like PHP and a framework.
I've said it before, and I'll say it again, though. JavaScript is the only fully featured programming language that runs in the browser, so we will always be using it. So you always got to bet on JavaScript. Brandon Ike said that, right? Like, always bet on JavaScript because that's
and
the
other
language
places.
that runs in the browser. And
it does run in the browser and the server and IoT and mobile. So yeah.
Say that to the team that I have that is using Java V1 and rendering the template in my bank. So yeah. I had maybe a thought, and that's perfect because we have a related question of like, hey, do you think that AI could help us in the front end, or like what should we expect? Because I think that as we just said before, that would be nice to like have configure tools. So maybe one day AI will be able to like set up ESLint, prettier, TSLint, and everything at the same time. So that way we don't spend like 12 hours every time we start the project. So what do you think?
I've been using AI in kind of an assistive manner. So Copilot, Codium, things like that in editor to do completions. With the right context, AI is really, really good. Without context, these general language models, they're good for like generating ideas or maybe correcting some sentences or things like that, but they're not intelligent enough about the space that you're working in to provide a ton of value. So I love the AIs that are built right into the editor. I think it helps me just get kind of code onto the page a little bit faster. It's just completing my thoughts, but you still have to double check it. You still really have to be careful about what you're pressing tab on and what's going out onto the page.
Mostly because AI is always, this is the way. And it's like, oh man, it looks so sure it's probably the right way.
Yeah.
It's very confident.
Exactly.
I'm not sure what the future will hold in terms of, even a year from now. Because I mean, a year and a half ago, we didn't even have ChatGPT. So it'll be interesting to see how it progresses. One of the things that I've kind of found myself in an interesting spot or space lately is I've been trying to learn Alpine JS. And this is the first time that I've tried to learn a framework with AI. And that's been an interesting process. But the biggest challenge that I've run up against is that a lot of times this syntax that it will suggest is for version 2, and they're now on version 3. And I think, one of the things that is great, but also terrible about the JavaScript ecosystem is that things move quickly and we are able to iterate fast, but it also makes it difficult for LLMs to keep up with what version is appropriate and making sure that it suggests the correct thing.
I think those suggestions and context around it will continue to get better and better. I mean, we've already seen like the evolution of just ChatGPT in and of itself. But I think the real power of AI right now is what you build on top of the underlying machine learning algorithms or whatever. So you look at ChatGPT and you look at being able to leverage the ChatGPT or OpenAI API. Now it's up to like the individuals to kind of maybe give it some additional context that might be missing and then pull out and extract answers from there, which lead to these like more focused, concentrated apps. Like you have ChatGPT, you can ask anything, but then I think the real benefit is getting into these specialized LLMs and applications that are built on top of LLMs. And so I think the discrepancy between versions, which absolutely is an issue. I talk about this with Astro, one of my favorite frameworks. They have a new major version like every couple of months, especially when I released my course on Astro for the first time. But I think those experiences that are built on underlying LLMs, I think that's where the real beauty comes from. And Brad, like you said, like I use ChatGPT, or excuse me, GitHub Copilot every day. And the interesting thing is, yeah, it's not right all the time, but I know enough to really quickly know that's not the answer I'm looking for. And I can either start to type a more realistic answer or just bypass it. And I used to fear that distraction of like backtracking out of code that it may suggest would take more time. That's absolutely not true for me. Like the amount of stuff that I just autocomplete and it's right, or I barely have to change, versus the time where I have to either say, don't use this at all, or try to give it more context. The benefit of that greatly outweighs the thought process that has to go into deciding whether or not that code is beneficial for me.
And that's why context is key when it comes to this stuff. And over the course of the past year or two, since all this stuff has come out, what have we seen? Larger and larger and larger context windows so that you can train it on a very specific set of things. That's why Codium is a really good option as a Copilot replacement, because you can actually choose what it uses as context from your code base. And you can even expand it into like repositories that sit next to the current code base you're working in, or different files. And so now it just has a better holistic understanding of what it can use as a basis.
The only issue is that sometimes you just have this AI pause where you type and then you wait for it to autocomplete. So maybe you kind of get out of the flow, and I kind of get that. And also, do anybody here remember Tab 9? I love how people are like, like autocompletion and like context, but nobody talks about Tab 9, who was like the first one to be there and doing exactly this. But yeah, it's quite funny how people are using it like easily, and that's nice.
I did try Tab 9, and I don't think I gave it a fair shot, but I did try it early on, and I felt like the context switching for me of deciding whether or not what they gave me was valuable was a little bit harder than it is now with Copilot. But I don't think I gave it a fair shot, so don't take that as like it's not a good thing, because I know lots of people that have used it and still use it. An additional thing on AI, I think it's important for people to remember in terms of the fear of AI on our industry is, we already talked about this. Like if we think back to 10 or 15 years ago, the knowledge that we had to have to manage a server, to deploy a server, when we were manually SFTPing files over to a server, we were manually running start commands, all these things. We don't have to do that anymore, right? Should I be concerned about? Oh, that's a different question. But like we don't have to do that anymore. We just push code to GitHub, and a lot of our infrastructure now automatically handles deployments. So if you fear AI taking your job, AI is just another tool. And it's going to replace things that we currently are doing, because there's no reason for us to continue to do boilerplate code for standard things if it can give it to us and we don't have to write it. So it's going to continue to do more for us, but that's not really different than any other invention that we've ever had in the history of mankind. Like we evolve, we do less of one thing so that we can spend more time thinking about more challenging problems that right now AI can't solve for us. So as people fear it, just remember, it's a tool. It changes how we work, but it doesn't replace us as human beings and as developers and technologists as a whole.
The analogy is when they invented the nail gun instead of the hammer and nail, did they have less carpenters? No, they built more houses.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm glad you said that. I'm gonna blank on the paradox. Oh gosh, I can't remember what it is. I talked about this in my AI talks. I think it's Devon's paradox. And the idea that people fear, exactly like you said, if AI is doing more for us, there'll be less jobs for us. But the reality is, like, what if that means we're able to build more than we've ever built before. And now we need more people to solve more challenging problems than we've ever solved before. Exactly like you said.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I double checked. So well played. Yeah, I also think that like if you lower the barrier of entry of like not needing to set up an Nginx config and stuff, yeah, you just bring more people into the industry, and that's always nice. What do you think about it, Amy?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting, your question exactly, because I think some of it depends on what you're trying to achieve. And I mean, isn't that the appropriate developer response? Is it depends. So a lot of times if you're trying to just launch a front end kind of website, James is totally right. GitHub makes that so easy where you just say, hey, here's my GitHub repo. Vercel, you can connect it to that GitHub repo. Netlify, you can connect it to that GitHub repo, and it just launches. It's available. There's really zero config on those things. But with, like, say, React server components coming in, now you have to have a server component. And if you're still hosting on Vercel, so you're running a next project, they've configured all those things that it will still help. But if you want any other type of server, if you're not trying to marry Vercel, if you want to, or Netlify and want to look at other options, you do have to know a lot more about those things. Or if you're, say, doing a PHP backend with a JavaScript front end or something like that, you do have to know a little bit more. There are still services that help with all those things. But again, some of it just comes down to your business use case and what companies you want to cozy up next to.
Yeah,
And I think it depends on what you're optimizing for. So like
Exactly.
serverless came about to be like, hey, this is a great way to lower your costs because you're only paying for like compute time. Serverless brings a whole ton of other challenges, but what it does do is it kind of takes a lot of the effort out of just running code on a server. Think about Cloudflare Workers, how easy it is to put an endpoint up that just is hosted, distributed globally, super fast. But I will say, I just released a video on YouTube talking about kind of advanced or senior level front-end developer skills. An invaluable skill is to have the knowledge to be able to install Node.js on a Linux box, start a web server, listen to some requests, understand that flow. And so like the more you can understand the APIs that your application is talking to and how to run them, you're just going to be like a much more well-rounded developer, and you'll know how to troubleshoot problems when they arise.
You know what's interesting about serverless world, and I love serverless, and the biggest thing for me with serverless is I can deploy a backend for free. It's like the biggest thing. Like if you want to take a full node project and deploy it somewhere, you have to pay now $5 a month or whatever, wherever you go, because DigitalOcean no longer has their free tier. Or excuse me, Heroku doesn't have their free tier anymore. So what's interesting though is you kind of touched on this. There's limitations with serverless, and I come across these a lot. And I posted about limitations of serverless on Twitter, and some people are like, "No, there's answers to this." And I'm like, "No, the answers are more complicated and
more services."
Like exactly. If I want to do a cron job, I have to now go and find a service or built into a platform like Vercel to do a cron job, which is something I could write with 2 lines of code in Node.js. And so I find examples like that, or long-running tasks, for example. How and where do you deploy long-running tasks when most hosting platforms have limitations on how long an API endpoint / function can run? You don't have that limitation when you deploy a Node.js application. So I have been so tempted on like 3, 4, 5 different ideas of applications I have to just build a stereotypical Node.js application and deploy it and host it for $5 a month, because I can do things that I've already known how to do for years and not have to integrate all these different services for message queues and long-running jobs and cron jobs and all these things. And I'm a huge fan of serverless. If I can do it with serverless, I'm absolutely going to do it. But I still find these limitations of, if I want to build X, Y, and Z, serverless is not the easiest way to do it.
You know, I also think though that sometimes doing it in Node on a VPS, on a dedicated server, might not be the easiest way to do it either. Because imagine you got 10 cron jobs you just set up and 8 background jobs are running, and now your process crashes.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, how do you recover that? You know, at least you have so much observability thanks to the serverless platforms. Even though it's complicated to orchestrate, you know what's going through your queues. You know the background jobs that are running. You can pause, cancel, stop any of them. You'll get emails when they fail. So much is built in that it almost does make it a little bit nicer to work with, although it's more complicated to set up at the beginning.
Yeah, like if you're a one-man person and you're trying to do some strap validation, having a serverless function is definitely easier than spinning up a node server.
Oh, yeah.
I wish there was some perfect combination of both.
Speaking about
Probably coming.
low-code platforms. Sorry, Amy. Maybe you
Oh no,
wanted
you're
to add
fine. That's
something?
all. No, you're
Okay,
good.
sorry. Yeah, do you think that they will affect front-end developers and the way they work with it? Like specifically, like do you think that maybe having it too much might remove some skills or just have some obvious drawbacks of just using them too much? Maybe like locking yourself up into an ecosystem?
Yeah, I think where I've seen the most benefit with no code and low code stuff are when you're talking about MVPs and just trying to get something out quickly. I've worked for several agencies, and that's one of the things that we've really talked about is how can we utilize these platforms to kind of do a proof of concept to make sure that it's going to work. And then once you find the edges, you're able to make a more educated decision about the coding tools that you're using. You can also, in some cases, access APIs. So you're extending no code, low code. So you have that MVP and then you can make it more robust with code. So I think that there's benefits there. I think the only main thing is it changes the problems that we focus on and how we approach them.
Fair. Thanks.
I go back to the AI conversation.
Mm-hmm.
AI is replacing, like, we're not having to do things that we used to do 5-10 years ago because AI is doing it for us. That's what low code, no code tools are, right? The same idea is taking care of stuff that we don't have to write ourselves. And if we look at the code that we write, like a big percentage of code that we write is relatively boilerplate.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is like, you don't have to write that code. A platform can take it on for you. I will say, I feel like even though low code, no code tools have been around for a while, I still feel like the vendor lock-in and the limitation as a developer, like I'm building something, if it fits what they do well, that's great. But when I get to a certain, I need to add X feature, I do feel like I've run up against that. And I think that's a tough one to move past. And I think most developers in most situations would choose to build themselves because of that. So I think it's finding the right tool for the right type of application. Amy, you've talked about, like, you're an incredible designer and CSS person, but you've used Webflow before because you could build the thing faster in Webflow to get it out the door and have it ready. And that's a huge advantage. That's a big deal. Now you could later on migrate to a platform that you build yourself, but you can take advantage of the tools that are there. But like AI, like the tools in AI, low code, no code is going to continue to get better. And it's going to continue to replace things that we just don't need to do. And the other thing is it's not really any different than we just talked about. All these services that we use, if we use a service to trigger cron jobs, if we use a service to handle authentication, if we use the service to handle real-time interactions with database, those are all things that are other people's code. That's code that we don't have to write, which is basically what low code, no code tools are. So if we kind of open up this view of like just tools that do stuff for us as developers that we don't have to write code for, we're using those every single day.
I'd say that there is one benefit of having someone working on the platform. It's like you can call the support and yell on them while the AI will be like, I don't care, man. Go for it. So,
yeah, and think about some of the most popular libraries and services out there right now. ShadCN, the UI is, as much as you may not want to admit it, it's low code. You are copy pasting code directly into your app, so you don't have to write it directly. Sure, it's free to modify, but it's such a great starter. And then, for instance, this pocket-based CMS that syntax folks were just talking about, it's a backend written for you. And sure, it's open source and you can install it and run it, but that's just code you didn't have to write at the end of the day. So most of what we're reaching for, and all these services that we were just talking about, like I want to run a cron job, I want to send an email. It's all just developers avoiding writing code in some way, shape, or form at the end of the day. It doesn't have to be one of these big platforms like Webflow or something like that, you know?
Well, one of the things we've kind of danced around is just maintainability.
Yeah.
Because you're talking about ShadCN, like he can come out with a new feature and that you can just incorporate. You don't have to maintain it. You don't necessarily have to write certain tests for it because hopefully they're doing those things for you. But the same thing is true even if it is a complete no code platform. So like Webflow, usually I'll reach for that if it's a client project, or I'm working with a marketing team. I can hand them a login. They can update copies. So no longer am I having to get emails of, hey, change this text. I can just empower the person that needs to maintain it to be able to do that. And so I think that that's a big like problem that it solves is the longevity of the project and how it gets updated.
Let's bounce back on the tooling that could help front-end, back-end teams and maybe like designers. What do you think?
I think we talked about modern frameworks, things like I talk about Next.js a lot, but then you could go across the board, Nuxt, Astro, all the full stack frameworks. They are bringing front end and back end closer together, but for better or worse, depending on which side of the fence you're on. But I think the benefit though is we're learning more about what full stack is. People that now learn React as they're getting started are probably starting with Next.js, and by virtue of that, they're at least getting exposed to what an API endpoint is. So they're learning about the server without having this like separate dichotomy of what the server is. I think from a collaboration perspective, we're having this interesting mix of running code that seems like it's running on the browser versus the server. And I'm talking about server components and how kind of weirdly mixed that is. But we also have the ability to share more code that way. We can share data models from front end and back end and not have to recreate those and have those listed. And what's where you have like a multiple project? What's that called?
Monorepo.
Thank you. Like you could just share more stuff innately based on what the frameworks do for you. So I think the tooling around that is helpful. And I think you're seeing, in my mind, more collaboration, understanding full stack than we used to when we had a harder divide between front end and back end.
And also, it's the same language, so that's perfect.
Yeah.
You don't need to learn Ruby or PHP. No. So yeah.
I was going to say, even coming at it from the other direction. So you can build a project in Webflow and use DevLink, which will actually export your no code, low code components as Next.js components and elements. So you can have those two things sync. You have Framer, where you can build a lot of the site in no code, low code, but say you want some custom functionality, you can write React components to live within a Framer project. Or even if you look at Figma, let's talk about design stuff. Now you can pull in a Figma project directly within VS Code and have that dev option to be able to get all that information that you need for a project. So it's kind of interesting that all these tools are converging. And I think the biggest benefit is that it gives us all a common language. Designers are better able to communicate with developers what they need. Developers have a better understanding of what's involved in the design process, and we can work together better because the tools are converging.
I think the scenarios that y'all are painting are great, but I think they're for new projects. They're for projects that people are starting with these full stack frameworks. So now you can kind of just use one handful of developers to do everything. There is no differentiation. Mm-hmm. But looking at this question, it's talking, I'm viewing it as like the enterprise side of things, collaboration between front end and back end teams. And I always think, okay, well, all of our backends are written in Java. And they're APIs that support many, many, many sets of customers throughout the company. And so the biggest thing that I see here is problems with API documentation and type safety. And that's why these full stack frameworks work so well, or ORMs like Prisma work so well. But when you just have an API that you're working with that's written in a different language, you really need to make that boundary explicit. It needs to be typed, and you need to make sure that that contract that you're signing up for doesn't change on you. And I think tooling could really come in here and help. I've been using Insomnia to document API endpoints and create those contracts in code that I can commit to the repository so that people can play with them, and that's our common ground for like what it is that we're going to interlock on. But I still think that there's a rub here. If you're not building your backend inside of your front end, pretty much, there's still that network chasm that can cause problems.
Yeah. James and I were at PostCon which is Postman's conference about a month ago. And some of the tools that they introduced were just mind blowing. The fact that you can say, here's my API, and then you can have AI write test cases for it or write documentation around it. So again, just the tooling around all that stuff is making it a whole lot easier.
There was a lot that they added for like enterprise teams too. You have comments, you can have requests for updates, store those things in GitHub to have version tracking and all sorts of stuff. So that sort of integration, it seems like that was a big focus for them and a big step forward, I think, in exactly what you were talking about, Brad.
Well, managing security and your authorization keys and all that stuff. Yeah.
And I think the challenge is the backends are written in many different languages. So each one of those languages is going to have some sort of adapter or thing that spits out a Swagger spec or an open API spec that you can pass around
to use.
But if it was standardized for some reason, you're like, this is the way we do it in this language, you can write that, and now you can generate documentation, hopefully, that can then be shared.
Let's add a bit of sorrow and darkness with this question. So how do you avoid the burnout with all of this and maintain a healthy work-life balance?
I think Brad just started the conversation that I wanted to dive into more, which is exactly lending to this question. And the reality is people like me that don't work full-time doing software development get to go and try everything that I want, and I can go see all the new things. But that's not the reality of how most people work. And I think, Brad, you're a good mix because you do lots of tinkering and exploring, and you try all sorts of things, but you also have a job where things don't move that quickly. And so I think for people that are kind of breaking into the industry and you pay a lot of attention to social media and things like that and watch content, which I would encourage you to do just to kind of get a feel for what's out there, understand that that's different than working for a company. Most likely, even a more modern company that moves fast doesn't move as fast as the YouTube videos that I create and other people will create. So I think one is understanding like, hey, there's a lot of things out there. Yes, it may be a little overwhelming. I think the thing you have to start by doing is giving yourself a priority. And how you do that depends on what your goals are. Do you just want to tinker and have fun? Do you want to prepare for your first job, which is most likely the answer? And if so, you should backtrack from what are the types of jobs that I might be interested in, or what are the types of jobs that are available in my area, or what are the types of jobs that I can find remotely on LinkedIn, and what are the technologies that they're using, and backtrack and go and focus on those things. So if you do research and you find a bunch of Vue jobs in your area, you should be learning Vue to make yourself more marketable for your skill set. And by virtue of that, you can ignore all the things that are happening in the React ecosystem, or at least not feel the pressure to dive deep into them. So giving yourself a path, and whether you can find that on your own or whether you need a mentor to kind of figure out what that is, giving yourself a path and the ability to concentrate and focus and have priority, I think takes a lot of that away. I think one other thing that I'm a huge advocate of is companies investing in their employee by giving them opportunities to learn. So if you feel like you're working for a company and you're having to spend hours and hours outside of your job learning, advocate and ask your employer, can I have 2 hours a week to do exploratory learning? Will you support me in sending me to a conference? Will you support me in attending a virtual conference like this? Will you support me by buying me a course? Will you support me to continue to further my learning so that I'm not having to do that outside of the job? And I can't tell you, as I was working at FedEx as an example, how many times I came into work and I knew an answer to something based on something I had done on my own outside of required traditional work tasks. So that's one thing that I highly encourage people to do. And I'm very passionate about the fact that employers should do, is supporting their employees either with time and or money and or resources to continue their learning journey and develop their skills.
Yeah, you pretty much spoiled my entire next talk about the topic. But yeah, that's exactly my take of like, hey, unsubscribe from newsletter, just pick Vue or something simple, work with it, and then at the end of the day, you can get with your children or like enjoy some free time. And if you really want to improve, then yeah, on your free time, take some books or read some articles. There's also one thing that I recommend is, yeah, maybe, I mean, I'm not sure if it's possible, but the people that can, yeah, maybe just ask for like a smaller contract where you only work 32 or 36 hours. That way you can like have some fun doing some side projects and yeah, not getting into this pit of drama and like what's happening, and like, oh man, React just released a new version like 2 minutes ago. Fuck, I need to update my entire code base. So yeah, that's like at the end of the day, focus on the things that matter, pick one, work with it, and then you can like check the feedback. Because otherwise, if you go on Reddit and you ask what's the best JS framework to start with, yeah, you will never see the end of it. So yeah.
I'm going to kind of turn this upside down a little bit. I think some of it is also knowing what gives you burnout and understanding yourself and what you need for that work-life balance. Because for me, I'm energized by learning new things and I get excited when there's new technologies. And that's not the cause of my burnout. I could study that stuff all day long and get excited and be energized. But there's other things where, like answering emails or Slack messages or things like that, that just take a lot of energy sometimes for me to be able to write out responses to people and, do paperwork and things like that. So for me, a huge part of it is making sure that I have the time that I need to be able to learn new things. But just, I know that's not true for everybody, and finding what works for you.
Meetups and conferences is nice. Even if you're like introvert and it's kind of like tiring, it's still like quite exciting. So yeah. Brad, do you have a take on this?
Yeah, I'll paint the enterprise picture. You want to go work for a big company. These big companies have had software stacks out there running for a long time. It takes a lot of time to transition. So the industry is all buzzing about React 19 server components, and the realistic situation is that most of the big companies are probably running React 16, maybe React 18 if you're lucky. They're probably big spa apps with a custom homegrown SSR solution. Things move slow, right, at the end of the day. So that's just to be realistic about it. But I think when it comes to like doing things on the side, it is great to be curious and build side projects. But I think you have to understand what the purpose of the side project is. I like to build certain side projects that are specifically for exploring. So I want to build a really small, kind of trivial application, but with all new technologies, so that the difficulty is in kind of learning the new technologies, exploring, and being curious. But if I want to build a side project where I'm like, hey, I want this to be a software as a service one day, or I want to I really want to actually build something that I can use, well, then pick a boring set of tools that you're really good with, that you can get it done with. Because the last thing you want is to have a goal in mind that you want to reach, but all you're doing is fighting with tooling. And now you're like, oh, I'm burnt out because this is frustrating me, So know your end goal and choose wisely.
That's a great point. We've had so many founders on our podcast that have said, pick a boring tool.
Yeah.
And just to like further drive home the point that you made, Brad, Facebook is running version 16 of React. They're not even running the latest and greatest.
Yeah. And they always say that stuff. It's like, because some internal app uses the new shiny stuff. Although they say that StyleX is actually powering like Instagram, WhatsApp, and Facebook, like everything styles, which I'm kind of amazed at. But yeah, all the internal apps is where you get to do fun experimentations. And like I said, the core products at Atlassian are running older versions of React, but every new project we spin up, we're looking at some of the new shiny things that we can bring into the situation.
So what do you think people are liking then in today's day?
Oh, can I start on this one?
Go for it.
It seems like you have an answer already
Gonna
prepared.
be spicy.
Look, I mean, I know what I struggled with when I first started. I dove right into frameworks before I truly understood the web platform. And now with these full stack frameworks, I think we're muddying the waters for beginners. Like, you have to know what the server does, and you have to know what the client does, and you have to know the HTTP interface between the two of them. What comes back over HTTP. Without that fundamental understanding of the request response cycle, all of this conversation about frameworks, React server components, server-side rendering, client-side rendering, all the complexities we've built up for ourselves over the years to make pages feel fast, it doesn't matter, because in your mind, you don't understand how the underlying technology works. I did this when I was an absolute beginner. I built like an HTTP request handler from scratch. I didn't use Express. I just used Node's HTTP methods to do it. And I was like, oh, this is what happens when you go to a browser and go to a web page. And so having those fundamentals, I think, is going to get harder and harder as our frameworks continue to cross that network boundary.
So you're basically like Dark Souls, get good or go home.
I hate that
Nice.
game, but it's too hard. But yeah, man, like you need to have solid fundamentals at the end of the day.
The first thing that I thought of was Tailwind versus whatever flavor of CSS you want, but it's the same concept that you're talking about. Is people just jump into Tailwind, and Tailwind does solve a lot of problems that you would get in traditional vanilla CSS. Like you don't have to worry about naming. Specificity isn't quite as hard, but there's other things that if you don't understand CSS and how properties are being applied, you can get frustrated very quickly and very easily.
People act like Tailwind solves the cascading problem, and I'm like, no, you can still leverage the cascade with Tailwind. They're just classes.
Yeah.
Or you can get super confused by Tailwind and put the like an altering class like text large and text XL and put up one after the other and think that that's how specificity works, and that's not how the cascade and specificity actually works in real CSS.
Or their compiler.
Yeah. And then going back to the complication of stuff like Tailwind, you end up adding additional tools to fix that. And anyway, one of the things I would like to bring up is the more I think about this, the more I feel pretty confident about it. Soft skills, people skills, however you want to phrase it. I don't mean soft in a negative way. I think soft skills are more important than hard skills. And the reason I say that is your hard skills, they have to be there. You have to have an understanding. But if you think about differentiating yourself from someone else, the hard skills are probably going to be similar. And I go back to like me in college. If you study a computer science degree, you're probably going to study very similar stuff to anybody at a university across the country or world, right? Like you'll probably have a similar foundation. If you go to a boot camp, you'll probably have a similar foundation to the other people that are in your group, to people at other boot camps, etc. Now, again, those skills are required. That understanding is required. But the way you differentiate yourself is with the soft skills. It's how you communicate. It's how you show up. It's how you portray confidence in yourself. It's how you intelligently talk about the technical things that you've done before. And if you can't do that, if you can't sell yourself, if you can't show confidence in yourself and bring that to the table, I'm not going to hire you over someone who has built the same thing and has the same technical skills, but has more confidence and more ability to communicate that. Now, look at my career and the success that I've had, specifically going back to my career at FedEx. I ended up getting a skip level promotion from a developer, and I was kind of ready for the next level of senior developer, but got offered a position as an architect, which was a skip level. And the reason was on my team, I was the one who was communicating to non-technical people the technical problems that we were having and the solutions that we were working towards. And that sort of thing for me has been a game changer. And it came from a background of speaking and doing podcasts and videos and content and that sort of stuff. This is all top of mind because the video I have to record for another talk is on this topic of like how to be more successful in technical interviews. And again, the more I think about it, I think the hard skills are a given, but soft skills are more important in terms of being successful in interviews and getting hired.
Yeah.
Do you think that there are gaps? I'm going to ask a question now.
Amy, the moderator. Amy, moderator.
Sorry. Gaps because of the remote culture. So like I've been doing remote work for over 12 years now. It would in some ways be hard for me to go back to in person, but I'm going to make myself sound old. There's parts of me that also misses the team and the collaboration that come with in person. I was talking to a friend even this weekend, and she's a bigwig now, but she was saying that her new hires, she's like, there are moments where she's like, can you not get up to speed? Like, how long is this going to take? Whereas like, I think of some of my earlier jobs where I was even working in the same room right next to other developers. And if I had an issue, I'd just tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, like, I don't even have to wait for a Slack response. And so I wondered if some of the gaps are self-induced based on our work environment.
Totally for junior developers. Like when they start, you really need to be in the office, in my opinion.
I think so. I think it's I don't want to go too far down that route because I don't want to discourage like the opportunities that people can have to start their career remotely, because that's
Yeah.
also amazing. But I think we do have to acknowledge it's harder to learn when you don't have the ability to turn to the person next to you, a senior developer, and ask a question. We have all the tools, we have Slack, we have Zoom, we have the tools to do it. There's just something different about literally turning around in your chair and being able to ask a question and to build that relationship. The other side of that, I think, is we have to embrace a culture of senior developers being teachers. We
Mhm.
have to support junior developers. And that's even more important now because of all the things that we just said, because of remote culture.
Yeah, and I think this is all just a great ode to saying creating content's probably a good thing in this remote world. Get your name out there, record some videos, write some blog posts, do something to cement your knowledge and share what you learn.
Yeah. I'll finish this question by saying that even if you're a media or senior developer, or even like if you're starting, don't put the ego in the equation, because I saw a lot of people coming with, oh, I have my Next.js app and I have Docker and I have my reverse proxy and I have this and this and this doesn't work. I'm like, yeah, it's a CSS issue. You're missing this one line. So it's like sometimes try to isolate the thing. It's fine if you have like a complex app. Just start a new project, put something simple where you have the bug and then inspect it, rather than like stacking piles and piles of things that you don't understand. Like I once tried to work with an Apollo, and like, man, let me tell you, with no GraphQL knowledge, nothing about how it's working, the cache, I was like, what am I doing with my life? So yeah, so sometimes just like go easy and make a minimal issue and then try to find the bug with it and then ship it to people. Because coming into a community and saying, hey, I have this, but it's like corporate thing, I can't share it, but it's a very big app, and then they put like 10 lines of their code base. It's like, yeah, we can't really help you with this because it depends of the context. And that's a perfect segue to my next question. What can we do as community to help those people and unblock them? Look at this fancy smooth segue, man.
I know.
He would have thought you planned that.
I mean, I have the questions ahead. So yeah.
I think the remote part is a big part of it. I think the overwhelming amount of options we have is a part of it too. And so I look at, for people that are getting started, I think we have an amazing amount of opportunities through boot camps. And I have a computer science degree. I wouldn't trade my degree / specifically my college experience for anything. But if I was looking to transition careers, I would 100% do a boot camp for 6 months and get a career as a developer in a year or something, reasonable target. So I think we have those opportunities. I think anything that we can do to stay welcoming, to stay inclusive, to focus on inclusivity in terms of diversity, to recruit more people into tech, I think that's a win. I think we do that by having a variety of speakers in terms of backgrounds, in terms of anything that you can think of, so that people see people like them in tech. I think that's something that there's been a lot of attention to. I think we're continuing to see that be an initiative, and I think it's an amazing thing. And I say that as a white male, where I can look around in any company and see a lot of white male developers, but it's not the case for other types of people. So I think that focus is huge for people to just see that it's possible. I think also the idea of giving back in some capacity, and I get to do that every day through content. We get to do this through the podcast. We get to do this by just talking about the stuff that we love, and that's pretty incredible. I go back to, again, probably the biggest struggle for someone that's getting started if they don't have the structure of a boot camp, or they just finished a boot camp and the question is, where do I go next? And how do I avoid the overwhelmingness of things that I feel like I need to learn? Being able to give someone a path, giving them suggestions on how to take priority, giving them suggestions on like, here's what to do now and next and why. I think that's a pretty substantial thing that we can offer the community, and it doesn't take that much work.
Meetups, basically. Like, get connected to people, in my opinion. So that way you don't, like I said, yeah, focus on something. Don't ask too much things. But at the same time, if you have some friends and they share the same vision, just go to them and ask them like, hey, how do you feel about this? Ask for help. Don't stay in your corner, like being anxious and not being able to solve issues. Just connect with people, share, and maybe you're gonna find something very interesting that you're gonna like. And maybe they're looking for a front-end developer too. So you can have many things coming out from connections of meeting random people at like Frontend Nation panel discussions. Like, man, it's crazy. So that's my take on it.
I think you make networking this big thing. All that really means is just go make friends. Be kind
Yeah,
to
but
people,
sometimes
talk
it's
to people.
difficult for developers,
think-
you know?
Well, and I think it's the mental overhead of like, oh goodness, what do I say? What do I do? But I think anybody that I've met that even I look up to within the industry has been so down to earth and welcoming. And so I think you would just approach it as you want to meet anybody. Just go have a conversation with them.
Yeah, the truth was told.
I'm going to come at this from a technical side of things, as I always do. I feel like one of the biggest challenges, I think, is going to be vendor lock-in. As we see more full stack frameworks, you're going to have vendors pop up to be like, you know, use our backend. We do it all for you. Just come in. And then it's going to be really hard to ever move off of those frameworks or hosting platforms if you ever have a need in the future. Same goes for things like services. If you're not using kind of like raw cloud compute infrastructure like AWS to do email and queues and all that kind of stuff, you're relying on services for that kind of thing. You're paying subscription fees, and then it's like, ooh, is there a good exit strategy here if they change their pricing, which has been happening a lot lately, or you know, I outgrow the needs of that specific platform, something like that. So be wary of vendor lock-in, and just be cognizant of the scale of your application.
Brad, where's your threshold for some of those things? Because I just think of like if it's a quick weekend project that I'm going to hack on, you know, I'll reach for clerk or, you know, something like that for authentication. But if it's something that takes off, maybe I want to own my auth. And so you never know what is going to take off and what's not. So do you solve for a problem that doesn't exist, or you just start with where you're at?
Ooh, auth was one of those interesting things where I'm like, I have to build this myself because I want to understand it. And so now it's just a part of every template that I deploy.
Of course it is.
Yeah.
Then maybe following this, with so many frameworks, which one do we pick for the right project?
Do research, figure out what kind of job you want. It's not, I'm not going to tell you anything other than do research and figure out for yourself what's going to be the most beneficial. There's no best.
What is your company using at the time? Like they're all very, very, very capable. So if it's for work, do the paved pathway that your work offers. If it's for personal, literally whatever interests you.
Yeah, also like if you want to work at a company that's using a specific tool, just use that one. Then to stay in the same topic, if you could create the perfect framework, what would you put in it? I mean, I will not ask James because he's like biased.
Amy.
But
Amy, you need to kick this one off.
I'm also
We had
biased.
a podcast about this recently, but she's been doing some
Man.
crazy exploration here.
Yeah, I'm also biased because I work on a framework full time, and I'm a core maintainer. So I am biased in the sense that I do like a lot of the stuff that Redwood has put into their framework, because they do handle all the backend database stuff. We provide that out of the box. We have auth out of the box. All that stuff is really tightly integrated. We have server functions. I mean, so many features. And where I would also like to see it go is I would love to see better file management support. So any of that, I'm having to reach for another tool. Jobs.
You're talking about like image, like backend features, like blob storage. Okay.
Yeah. So anytime if somebody wants to upload an avatar, I need to reach for a Cloudinary, which Cloudinary is a great tool. That I just released a video on it. I love Cloudinary, but I would just like to see either a tighter integration or better support or native support even for that. And we've talked about that as a team. Another piece of that is like queued jobs. So a lot of these pieces are server pieces. So lately I've been experimenting with Laravel, and it does a great job on the back end stuff where I feel like a lot of these modern front end frameworks are moving towards, but Laravel is already solved. Laravel, I feel like, is coming out from the back end position. So there's parts of Laravel on the front end that I feel like it's lacking. But anyways, jobs is another thing. Right now you need to reach for something like ingest. And that just goes back to like what James and Brad were talking about. If you have those longer running processes with serverless, you have to find a way to solve for that. And so if there's a way to create those jobs on the server and then not have to worry about that or reach for another service, that the framework handles that, it makes that, Brad, you were saying you have to tie all these pieces together. It makes it easier to tell where that's coming from and where you are in the process with those things.
I just had an idea like right now, and this is exactly what I would do. Okay, there was some big news at ReactConf where all the Remix features are getting backported into React Router, and React Router will be the future of what Remix kind of is, which gives Remix a lot of freedom to be whatever it wants to be in the future. What if, because React Router knows all about your routes and all about your data requirements, and that, it kind of knows how to talk to the server and, revalidate your loaders when things change. What if the Remix package was all of those server actions that we were talking about, queues and crons and this and that, and you just have an adapter for whatever host you're on. So if you're hosting on Cloudflare, it knows how to do Cloudflare queues and Cloudflare KV and Cloudflare durable objects and all these things, or the AWS adapter to hook it up to the AWS cloud. And now Remix becomes like the set of tools that Laravel kind of provided you with. Oh, throw in some ORM stuff in there or something like the backend that you want, but it also knows how to talk to React Router on the front end. So somehow you could get type safety or something like that. I don't know. Like, that's what I would do is make two separate packages, one that runs on the server or a cloud environment with adapters, and one that runs on the client like a router package, but make them know about each other so that network gap, like they're ready to receive the handoff at either side.
I know Remix has some crazy ideas. I don't know if that's
I'm going to the Remix meetup tonight, and I cannot wait to talk about it.
And to talk to Brooks. I would say the one nice thing, though, I'll do a Redwood plug, is we do have a component called Studio, which, like, for Mailer is one that people have trouble with. Redwood offers that stuff out of the box, and Studio is really cool. If you're in a dev environment, it will catch that email going out so you can see it and like develop it within the browser, within the tools that you're already using. So I would just like to see, with Redwood specifically, tighter integration with those things that you're talking about.
I would love to see, and this is my original comparison with Blitz.js and with Redwood.js, is Ruby on Rails for JavaScript. And the thing that I love, and Redwood does some of this, it had scaffolding built in, which I don't know why we don't have this more often. Like Redwood has some scaffolding commands. Angular has some scaffolding commands. I don't for the life of me know why this is not a bigger thing, like just scaffolding in general. I also would love, and this is my perception based on what people say on Twitter, the idea of PHP having a solution to almost everything. And Ruby on Rails, I think, has stuff like that too. But if you think about auth, like, yes, there's a lot of auth options, but why do I not just have a basic auth option that I can start with that's embedded in the framework? Why do I not have a solution or a boilerplate solution to handle file uploads, for example? Like, obviously, it's got to be attached to some sort of storage. But those sort of things that we have in all applications, why do we not have more of that boilerplate available to us? So I think back to Ruby on Rails. I think of what I hear about what people love about PHP. I think about some of the modern tooling, Redwood being an example of that. And Meteor, I think, was another one that I feel like I heard, like, having really good, just like, this is stuff you're going to need. Here it is. I would love to see just more of that baked into a framework.
Okay, so let me tell you, this is going to blow your mind. If you go to the Redwood.js website right now and check out the blog, we released a blog post yesterday where one of our core team members did a proof of concept on forms. And
I did. I saw the newsletter. I didn't read this. Okay,
Yay.
Continue.
Okay, so this is really exciting with, say, Rails.
Yeah.
It knows your backend. So if you say, hey, I'm going to add, in this case, it was related to a doctor. I have a doctor's appointment with physicians and things like that. I'm going to add a new patient. When you add a new patient, because you already have access to the database, it knows all the properties that you need to be able to add a patient. But because we are composable, we're pulling all these different pieces in, we still have to build out the form. We have to say all these things, do validation, check for your properties, things like that. With Rails, you can just say, hey, this is a patient form. And yes, you'll have the fields, but it knows to do all those checks for you.
Mhm.
So anyways, a core team member basically created that same functionality with Redwood, where you just say, here's the form. And because we know all the pieces that are needed in your database, it can do all that validation for you. You don't have to like process all these fields, upload this, check to see if this exists. It just handles it. And I think like that's the magic that people are looking for.
Yeah.
I'll have to read through that. That is one of the particular things that I remember was when you added a new data model in Ruby on Rails, you could also then scaffold all the CRUD routes.
Yep.
So you have a standardized routing system based on CRUD. You also have it built a form for you. It's not styled, but it had a form. I don't remember if what I'm thinking of generated validation, but validation is nuts. It's disgusting how like much goes into form validation.
Well,
It's
how
so
many lines
wild.
of code?
Yeah.
You know, it's like it's not hard in the sense that we have libraries involved, but just the number
Just a
of
lot.
lines of code. Yep.
I think you might be on mute. We blew you away with our answers. Oh, still on.
Yeah,
Still on
hear
mute,
you.
right? Yeah, I can't hear you.
Yeah.
I was like, hopefully it's not just
Sorry,
me and I'm
indeed,
talking over
my
everyone.
bad.
There we
There
go.
we
We
are.
got you.
I was moving my table before, so I was saying that yeah, I'm very happy that you're saying all of those nice things about Rails, because started there. I was like, yo man, yeah, it's nice, but like all the cool kids use Node.js and that's just better. You have more things in it. But like, yeah, 60 years later, I realized that, man, like if you want to upload something on like Amazon and have some authentication where you log in and you want to like double check something and fake the fact that you're a specific user to kind of find what's the issue in the database. Man, like you don't have this. Like you need to wire 15 things together, and yeah, it's not that well battle tested. So yeah, sure, it's maybe not like something like Go or Rust or something that's like crazy fast and that you can handle like billions of queries per second. But yeah, at the same time, it doesn't matter. And Rails is still one of the best TTP, let's call it this way, framework of like time to go public, because you don't spend time reinventing the wheel and you just ship something that works. So man, I really love that take of all of you on Rails. But yeah, and I mean also like people are used to, I mean, still bash on PHP because they think like that it's rubbish. But again, when I look at Laravel and like the latest release of PHP, yeah, it's like good again in the end. So yeah, a backend framework doesn't really matter in the end. So yeah. As a last question before we wrap up, how do we improve? Do you have any idea on like how to find a mentor?
That
It's
one's
like
for
totally
James.
unrelated. I'm sorry. I just had a last question. I was like, yeah, this is interesting.
I have a way not to do it.
Oh. Hi.
Say more.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, if you tweet or DM me hi, or you tweet and say, will you be my mentor? And that might sound a little snobby, but here's why, is because when you DM me and you say, will you be my mentor? I don't know exactly what that means. My interpretation of what being your mentor looks like might be different than what you're actually looking for. And so the easiest thing for you to do is you can engage in me in a conversation. I welcome conversations, but say like, hey, I'm working on this project. Would you mind to take a look? Or put a time frame on that. Like when you say, will you be my mentor? I don't know if we're talking about like a project engagement, a week engagement, 10 years engagement. So it's better if you can help qualify that when you do reach out to somebody. And I would say, like, you don't even have to make it official. There's tons of people within the tech community that I consider my own personal mentors, and they probably have no idea that they are my mentor. But they're people that I look up to, that I have conversations with, some of them that I know personally. But like I've never had that conversation, you can have a mentor without like a formal agreement.
Okay, I'm DMing you ASAP. Now I had a more of negative take on this because I mentored around, I don't know, 20, 30 people. But the issue that I had is usually people don't get invested that much. Like those were beginners for the most part, but like the issue is like, hey, either the person doesn't really care or find it too difficult, and then they never come back to it, which is very saddening because you invested, I don't know, like 2, 5, 10 hours of your time, and then they just don't want to come back and like make the effort. So that's a bit sad. And so I even had a one time when a guy came, he's like, hey, I have all of these things that I don't know. Can you help me with this? I'm like, oh, I have no clue myself, man. I'm sorry. It's like it's not even my topic, so yeah. But yeah, it's difficult. Like you really need to have like a nice bond and like feel a connection with the person, so that it's not only, oh yeah, I'm gonna like share you it and tell you what to do. You need to push the person forward and like make the person try to find their own answers without serving everything like on the plate. But it's definitely important, and like people like you who are very open of like welcoming any person willing to improve as a mentee is very honorable. So thanks for that.
That's a great point in terms of somebody also bringing the effort. I think my favorite take on this from anybody that I've heard talk about mentor-mentee relationships is Brian Douglas. And he's talked, had I steal?
No, I was just hoping it was me, but that's okay.
Missed seal of approval.
That's
Man.
so funny. But Brian Douglas talks about how he's provided like a scheduling link for somebody and said, here's 15 minutes. Now, in order for me to mentor you and for you to come to this meeting, I need you to tell me all the questions you're going to ask me ahead of time. And so then you feel like they've put in the work to be there. And also you have a heads up on what they're going to ask and how you can help them. And then it's a limited conversation. Like he only gives them like 15 minutes chunks of time, which as someone mentoring, I feel like I can give you 15 minutes. That's not a big deal. It's when, again, I don't know the length of the engagement or exactly what we're talking about that it becomes harder or more difficult for me to commit to.
Very good take. Damn.
One thing, I mean, Amy said all the things I would have said. I think that being respectful of their time is the biggest, most important thing, and that's coming prepared. There's also the ability to provide value to them first, whoever that is. And if you think about a lot of the creators that we follow, they have their own Discord. What better way to provide value to them than to show up and be active in their Discord? And I think about this for my Discord in particular, or if you're just following someone's content or their Twitter post, show up for a person to kind of show them that you're engaged first before formally reaching out. And then after you've provided some value just by being there and contributing, then say, hey, I'd love to have 15 minutes of your time. Here's the things I'd like to work on. I hope that we can make it. I think you should also understand that 15 minutes, although it seems small, is often a hard thing to come by for people. So don't take it personally if people just say no. That's part of it. It's hard. I wish I could do all the things that people ask of me, and I just can't. So understand that it may not work out, but it's not necessarily a personal thing. It just is a challenge to do that at scale.
Yeah, sometimes you need to say no to like answer to the bigger audience. And like if you have a backlog of 5 years of meetings back to back, maybe pass.
I think one of the best ways to get informal mentorship is asking questions in pull requests. If you're a mid-level or junior engineer, that means you have a job. You're contributing to a code base on a team. And if something, just like watch pull requests from other developers, you should probably be reviewing them anyways. But if you don't understand something, don't just be like, oh, they know what they're doing. Ask the question, right? Learn about the line of code, learn about the strategy they're employing. And as a senior developer, as we talked about earlier, be ready to help or be ready to give a really good answer and explain yourself. I find myself writing more and more and more in pull requests that, justify the decisions I make or explain the choices I make, not only to educate, but to like get other people's opinions. So it's kind of a two-way street, be able to explain it and ask those questions. Then you learn a lot for free, kind of without really asking for anybody's time specifically.
Yeah. Love it.
Yeah. On all of this, love, do we have any few words? Or
Thanks for having us on. This has
Yeah,
been so
been a
much
lot of
fun.
fun.
Yeah, really good questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for a venue. I mean, I was just the host. Like the questions were natural. But thanks for being amazing attendees of this. And that was also very nice discussion because we got like opposite takes. So always nice. And otherwise, I hope to see you someday, somewhere, anytime soon.
Yes, please.
Have a nice day.
See y'all.